I played the entire Last of Us series nonstop, part 1, the DLC where it belongs chronologically, and part 2. 27 hours of stream, 22 hours of gameplay, no sleep. All possible spoilers ahead for the series. Here's what I learned about the Last of Us series. This is a bit of a love letter to it, along with what I learned about gaming itself. I thought it would take 28.5 hours of gameplay by my calculations and over 30 hours of stream. Because of course I was going to talk to my chat. I thought I would still hate Abby. I was nervous I might hate Ellie or even Joel based on playing it nonstop like this and seeing their whole journey. And I wasn't even sure I could do it in that amount of hours, especially without sleep. If you haven't ever marathoned a gaming franchise before, you have a bit of nerves starting out. When we started stream, I was a bundle of nerves. I just wanted to live in the story more than any other gamer had before. I haven't ever seen anyone else do this type of experiment. There are speedrunners who play the games all the way through. Even then they practice and they're trying to get it into just a few hours for the actual gameplay. They're skipping cutscenes, all of that. There are, of course, people who are completionists who've spent tons of time in the game, gathering collectibles, all of that. But this was something unique, different, and distinct from all of those, in that I was trying to experience the story plus the gameplay and feel everything that the characters were feeling in the most heightened possible way by experiencing the entire narrative all the way through without stopping. Getting all of Joel's story, getting all of Ellie's story, and connecting that with Abby's story all at once with all of the gameplay, because the gameplay part of a game matters so much for how you experience and perceive what the game makers are communicating with you. So as I started this journey and pondered my insane decision as that first long cutscene as Sarah begins, and as I rounded the first familiar corners as Joel, I put my nerves to the side because it was no longer about me. I wanted to live as these characters, to experience the full power of the story at once, to understand Ellie and the other characters' level of mental anguish and exhaustion by the end, that I couldn't help but perceive everything the way that they did. I wanted to truly love these characters as real people, even Abby, who I generally don't like. It was amazing to notice things early on in part 1 that would carry through the game and even into part 2. The references, parallels, mentions. There was so much to notice, and this was the way that I could put them all together. All the way through part 1, I felt like Joel. At first, just doing what I needed to do for the task at hand. But all the way to Tess's death, I was putting one foot in front of the other, or one thumb in front of the other, to accomplish whatever was next. But after Tess, something really opens up for Joel. It feels more serious. And when we go to Billstown, just as Joel realizes that his journey is serious, I realize mine is as well. Every additional hour spent in the game, I found myself wanting more and more to get Ellie to the destination safe and sound. Her sarcasm, her wit, her joy for life. I remembered that my journey was about living in the moment and making the most of it, just as they were. While they were trying to survive, I was trying to understand, and in order to do so, I had to stay on track, and I couldn't mess up. I struggled with the DLC more than part 1. I had actually barely died in part 1 at all leading up to the DLC going through fall. This made sense to the characters as well. Ellie would have naturally struggled more than Joel as she fended for herself in a way she'd never had to before, and trust me, the mad and mad curious came out a little bit during the DLC. One girl against dozens, at least in the present day. There's a flashback portion of the DLC with her friend and romantic interest Riley. Her time with Riley ends on the best line of the entire franchise as her perspective shifts back into her saving Joel. And that line is that much more powerful when I know what's about to come. And the line goes something like, make the most of the time you have with the people you love. And it transitions into Ellie helping Joel, and that's what was going on in the present day during the parallel with her flashback to her time with Riley, both of which occur in a shopping mall setting. And that line means so much when you think about the 5-year span between part 1 and part 2, and going straight from part 1 into part 2 and getting to play as Joel again for a moment, but like 5 years later, and knowing that he and Ellie have had, while some disgruntled experiences, conflict between each other, they've had some very beautiful moments and at least made the most of as many moments as they could. And so going straight from 1 to 2 was so powerful. And that moment, realizing in the DLC that she's doing exactly what Riley had suggested at the end of the DLC, and it was that much more powerful as I played part 2. But as I had that beautiful moment, I realized I was behind. The beginning had taken longer than I anticipated, and I had actually broken down the speedrun type breakdown I have in an Excel spreadsheet of how long I anticipated each section would take me, and I broke it down by part 1, DLC, part 1B, part 2, A, B, and C for Ellie, Abby, and Santa Barbara. So I had been behind on part 1 at this point. This is a terrible plan. We're about to die. Do 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 do. Let go through. Oh my God. Okay, we're fine. Everything's fine. Needing sleep would ruin this experiment almost entirely. I wanted to experience the series without a break. So I felt like I was barely keeping my experiment alive, just as Ellie was fighting to keep Joel alive. And I still had all of winter to make it through, which is the toughest part of the game. And I never, ever, ever feel ready for coal mine, especially not when I already felt like I was failing. If I was doing this poorly to stay on schedule for part 1, what if I made mistakes in the much, much longer part 2? In a game that long, mistakes could cost me hours, which might destroy my entire run by breaking it with sleep. It might have looked cold in the game, but I, in real life, was sweating with pure adrenaline. And I got coal mine in 1 try. Right when Ellie was at her darkest as she murders David, I realized nothing else matters outside of this moment. Joel comforted Ellie and my chat comforted me. When I wearily called out another naughty dog yellow leading us down the yellow brick road, chat took a shot. For legal purposes, I am kidding. We took a moment to enjoy the giraffes, regardless of how long the journey was ahead of us. And it was then that I realized how close we really were to the end, at least of part 1. And this was a great parallel to Joel and Ellie's journey, constantly feeling the journey lengthening until all of a sudden, we made it. I stealthed through the entire next to last section with the giant bloaters, and while in real life wearing a literal gas mask, mind you, if that wouldn't pawn me to these characters, I don't know what would. The fireflies found us, and as I glanced at the clock, hope found me again because I'd finally made it to the hospital. But part of me already missed talking to Ellie and the history of ice cream trucks with Sam and Henry. We'd lost so much to get to this point. We'd ventured together for so long, and I was about to have to say goodbye to part 1, to young Ellie, and to Joel. I wanted the most authentic experience possible in the game, and so I did something most don't do when in the hospital. I didn't slaughter an entire hospital of fireflies like many claim Joel has to do when analyzing his moral dilemma. No, I killed the minimum amount of people needed and only took 3 lives, all arguably in self-defense. I killed the soldier holding us captive, the doctor holding a knife at me before I ever lifted one of my own weapons, and Marlene, who was holding a gun at me in the end and absolutely would have come after us had I let her live. I snuck past everyone else in the entire hospital, first try. That's what I think Joel would have done. Joel doesn't panic, and at this point in his life, he's lived in consistent high-stress situations. He made the level-headed decision not to unleash the entirety of the hospital on himself or to get any sort of revenge for them trying to take Ellie's life. He just wanted to get Ellie out as quickly as possible. I actually noticed my biggest perspective shift here for the story. I always hated when Joel lied to Ellie at the end of part 1, but this time, I finally understood. Knowing everything I know now, having lived his experience all at once and feeling his joy when he grew to love Ellie and his pain when he thought he'd lose her. As my own emotions were working to be successful with him and to understand him, I realized what I never had before. That while I generally hate lying, Joel's lie to Ellie was the best possible action in order to move forward and truly give Ellie her freedom from the immense responsibility the Fireflies had put on her.
Swear to me that everything that you've said about the Fireflies is true.
I swear.
Was it right for him to do so? Still no. I always would have saved her, but until this specific playthrough, I didn't think I would have lied to her. Okay. But I understand now why he did. And I think it was the smartest course of action on his part for what he was trying to accomplish, which was saving Ellie and giving her her freedom from the huge responsibility the Fireflies had placed on her. And in reality, it's not like there wouldn't necessarily be any other doctors somewhere. Now, the likelihood of them being part of a group where they would have the resources in order to help, or being found in order to help, or having studied all of this in order to help. Yes, that's pretty low. But so is the chance that this would even work. So I would make the same decisions as him. And at this point, during this playthrough, I realized I would also lie. Even knowing everything I was about to experience as I booted up part 2. Losing Joel, no matter how many times I do it, I always want to save him. I always almost have a hint of hope, even though my brain tells me, of course, it isn't possible. I don't hope to save him when we're going to find him as Ellie. No, by then I've accepted his fate. But every single time, I hope that when they meet Abby, Joel and Tommy don't let their guard down. It doesn't even make sense for them to. After playing this all the way through, seeing how careful both Joel and Tommy are and how much they both go out of their way to protect those they love, it seems insane to me that they'd immediately tell strangers their names and invite them into their safe haven. They know as well as the player that the zombies are only a small portion of what they have to fear in the world. That's what we learned in part 1. To see Joel so quickly throw away that important lesson of part 1 for complete strangers, I've never bought it on any playthrough. And on this one, after seeing just how careful they are in part 1 right before playing it, how much Joel grows that protector side of himself again, there's no way I buy it. It's the biggest plot hole by far, and in this nonstop playthrough, it becomes even more glaring. Nonetheless, we continue on, and one of the most surprising twists of my entire playthrough occurs as I watch Joel die again. Wishing more than anything to exist in the moments where Ellie shares her puns, and Joel shares pre-apocalypse tidbits that I was experiencing only an hour before. With that thought, I see Abby and I start to picture what's to come of her story, and I realize something as I seethe in my hate for her. And in this playthrough, after spending so much time in Joel's shoes in part 1 right before this moment, I'm more angry at Joel and his death than I am at Abby. He didn't even know why. He'd committed enough atrocities in his life to feel like this was some form of justice he deserved, even if he, of course, wanted to fight to live. But even knowing how many enemies he's amassed, he didn't try to protect himself from this moment. Abby had been hunting Joel for years, but Joel had let his guard down after learning this lesson in the worst possible ways over and over again. From Tess getting bit but actually dying by human hands, from Sam only having been bit because of a fight with other humans, from Henry's decision to remove himself from the world due to his loss of Sam, from Joel's lesson in the hospital where he faced humans that would take the life of an innocent child for a small chance at something that would hardly even help a humanity so far gone from civilization. That's not even mentioning when he was the one on the other side of things, hurting others for his own survival. Joel knows what people are capable of, yet he let his guard down, putting far more than just himself in danger. Abby's actions weren't justified. Absolutely not. Never will be. She hunted down a man who saved an innocent child and took her father from her in the process. But he clearly never intended to hurt anyone there. It's not justified. Nor is any level of violence, which is what this game is all about. But Joel had all the information he needed to keep himself alive. And the way I saw it in that moment is he let himself get killed. I know this sounds a little victim blamey, but he knew the consequences of his actions, and he should have kept his guard up the rest of his life. That was his comeuppance for everything that he had done. That was his punishment, was to have to keep his guard up in order to keep himself alive. His last act made me inconceivably angry in this playthrough, but his intent was always in doing his best for himself and his people. So I can't help, even through my anger at Joel. And of course, because nonetheless, he's still a victim of this, trying to react to the circumstances that we can in the best ways we can. I can't help but to forgive him. However, my journey to that forgiveness took a while, and it was aided with Ellie's journey to forgiveness as well. I was able to parallel her multitude of emotions towards him because of this, and it made her perspective that much more powerful for me as I began her descent into revenge. Side note that I love Dina. She's perfect. And her and Ellie's time in the open world portion, especially when she mentions wanting to live on a quiet farm and then it actually happening later with Ellie, I melt every time. It went about as expected through Ellie's portion of part 2. I enjoyed it, and then the first wave of tired started to hit right about at the 15 to 16 hour mark. Anyone who's ever done a 24-hour stream plus before has known the feeling of when you start to feel like you're meeting your maker. And hour 18 is generally the hardest of all. Thinking that I wasn't even halfway through and that this would be a 32 to 33 hour stream, I decided to do Red Bull at this hour. And this would have been likely towards the middle of the night or gaining on it, so it was time to make a decision. And I hadn't had an energy drink like Red Bull in ages, and it hit. My chat now knows this period of time in our game as Red Bull Mad, and she powered through Ellie day 2 and 3 with as many speedrun strats as a casual ever could. In fact, an awesome group of speedrunners raided during this time, some of whom have become part of the long-term community from then on, and I got really nervous that I'd embarrass myself in front of them in Hillcrest, where if I made even the smallest mistake, it would be a long bloodbath instead of a quick stealth. But Red Bull isn't kidding about their wings, and I'm too small for them to sponsor at this point, so this is not me trying to sell you on it, but my goodness, do I now know its power. I'd even had a couple of drinks at this point in the game, and my whole energy turned around at this point, and I immersed myself fully in Ellie's journey, her quest for revenge becoming my own. And when Nora says, "Do you still hear his screams?" I once again dive into the darkness, feeling nothing but pure red rage as we enter the red scene and torture her without even a thought to her being human anymore. Not after a line like that. Yet I'm technically doing the same or worse to her. It's a weird feeling knowing that Naughty Dog wanted us to get to, and to realize how dark revenge and violence is from any perspective. But even with that self-awareness, I still feel fully blinded by emotion in this moment. If there's ever a time to say, holy this game is good, it's at this moment. I continue this way for the next hour, focused, feeling one with Ellie, absolutely destroying everything in my path without giving them the slightest chance. It was at this point that I started to think I might make it without sleep, and when I found myself at the end of the arcade bloater, getting him on my first attempt with the entirety of days 2 and 3 for Ellie done in my makeshift version of a speedrun permadeath mode, I knew my experiment would be a success. I'd beat my estimation by an entire third for Ellie's section, and I was awake enough to keep it going through the end. I just hoped I wouldn't get stuck anywhere as Abby and start to lose my mental grip. At this point, while I figured my physical body would make the long journey, I still had to be mindful of the mentals, and even if they were fine, paying special attention to what I felt from Abby's perspective this go-round. Wanted to feel what both women felt at the end of the game. And I wanted to see if it felt different this time, with everything that I was going through at once. I needed to see if my hate for Abby was truly justified. Abby's section isn't short, and I still had Santa Barbara after that. We'd made it all night, and the sun rose as I began playing Abby. I made some coffee, and we began. The coffee was helping, but 20 hours into gaming just doesn't allow the same instincts as hour 0, and I started making silly mistakes, resulting in Abby deaths, which, let's be honest, doesn't bother me that much as any other character deaths. Definitely related to this is one section I hadn't studied up on. On the 5 or so days leading up to this playthrough, I had a big Fall Guys stream event to prepare for, and only had a few days based on when I finished my Uncharted playthrough. So I took full advantage by binging as much as I could of Anthony Caliber's speedrun walkthroughs for the series, and I wasn't kidding when I said I piecemealed speedrunning strats together. I memorized as much as I could while multitasking those days, but I didn't want to just nail strats. I wanted to understand the characters. So I focused on Abby's journey too. I'd always hated her, of course, because she murdered Joel in cold blood for revenge, when his goal was never to kill her own father out of malice, but clearly to save a child. But additionally to that, she had 5 years to grow, to mature into an adult, and to try to make sense of it the best she could. But she chose the self-destructive path instead, and it ruined the lives of everyone around her. Of course, this is the same path I experienced some of with Ellie, and would unfortunately have to relive again very soon. So if I hate her, I have to hate Ellie too. And if I don't, it's purely me being unfair to Abby, which is exactly what Naughty Dog wanted us to get to in this journey. I knew I had to understand it, and if anyone could, it's someone going through this insane experiment of experiencing the whole narrative without stopping. So I grabbed a breakfast beer and embraced Abby as a person as much as I could. Literally a breakfast beer. It was a waffle and syrup beer, and it was very good. I played her as she tried, as she felt conflicted, as she put others first, as she lost everything she knew and tried to build something better. I followed her towards a lighter path, the opposite of my experience with Ellie's over her section 7 hours, and with specifically drawn parallels to Joel's story in part 1. A side note from her character development, I nailed the Rat King in one go, and I will forever be proud of that moment. When I fought Abby's own people in battle, the battle she wanted no part in, which, side note, is one of the most beautiful parts of the game. I love the Seraphite's home. I realized Abby really does work for her redemption in this story. And even when faced with nearly insurmountable odds, seeing people she feels are related to her father's own death, and then they destroy everyone she knows after she chooses to let them live, she at this point nearly has every right to want to take revenge when she meets Ellie in the theater and considers killing Dina. Abby is tempted with her darkness yet again, as she was at the beginning of her story, but the person she saved brings her back to the present, reminds her that she's chosen to build rather than destroyed. I hated her fight with Ellie, as I always do, but for the first time I actually saw Ellie as the enemy in it. Ellie had a darkness about her that was hard to come to terms with. It was in this moment that I didn't hate Ellie or Abby, or even love both of them. Not yet. But I was starting to understand them. I was starting to understand what Naughty Dog had intended, and I wanted to feel that. This was my 3rd or 4th playthrough of the game, and I was finally ready to feel the whole weight of it. To not try to control the story, but to feel it in its entirety. As Abby let go of Dina and Ellie, I let go too. I loved Ellie again in her quiet moments on the farm, in her meaningful moments with Dina, in her role as a mom, in her peace as she too tried to build instead of destroy. I blame Tommy a lot for everything next, but everything next isn't all bad. He didn't go through Ellie or Abby's journey. He'd been in good spirits when everyone found each other again. And he'd been ready to give up the fight after everything they'd sacrificed and after the amount of revenge they'd already gotten. He seems to have had enough. I realized here that we need more of Tommy's story. Because other than feeling like he'd lost too much because of his eye, or losing Jesse, or finally going through the full range of emotions after his adrenaline-fueled revenge journey, I wondered why he was so different than the moment he'd been ready to leave it all behind. I hope we get a DLC or something that answers it someday, but regardless, I can hardly blame him. Taking it out on Ellie, though, he had to have been in some serious darkness to do that, especially knowing she'd already risked everything, including his own life, to get that revenge the first time. In a weird way, I felt glad to see he and Ellie still shared that bond, that Ellie wasn't alone in her trauma. I wish they'd gone about working through it all together in a better way, but alas, as much as I always pause to try to stay on the farm, I applaud the writers for not doing so. Dina's pleas for Ellie not to leave get me every single time. At this point, I know it's too early for me to let the waterworks out, because they might not stop if I do. And I'd made it too far to let my emotions out before I've worked through the entire journey. I'm starting to sound like the characters just by thinking that. The way that they power through and do what they need to do before they process. The nonstop playthrough really did take its toll on me. At this point, it was working. From this point on, I had to hold back tears and try to focus. But I felt like Ellie at this point. I needed sleep. We were 24 hours in, an entire day of just existing in the Last of Us world. I could feel my mental state starting to lose its grip. As Ellie barely held herself together to finish what she felt she had to do, so did I. I wanted to see her through the closure she needed. And here's what only those who love this game understand about it. The game is built as an odd sort of therapy. Nothing even scares me anymore. Disclaimer that this is not a recommendation to necessarily use games as therapy, but the emotional journey this series takes you through is powerful and cathartic. If you let the feelings in that the games want to communicate with you, you can't help but go from cynical survivor Joel to caring dad mode Joel to older peaceful Joel. And from survivor Ellie to cynical, yet making the most of things Ellie, to destroyed Ellie, to revenge Ellie, to wife and mom, PTSD Ellie, to this moment where she meets with an Abby who's gone from bright-eyed kid to revenge-fueled adult to trying to rebuild from the ashes of her own destruction. As I approach that Abby with my tattered and beaten down Ellie, who's thrown away wife and mom PTSD Ellie, but to try to find a way for her destruction to stop. I remember Abby never reached that same level of darkness as Ellie has. Abby didn't see her dad die, nor was it in the needless, gruesome way she killed Joel. Well, okay, maybe the way I specifically killed the Dr. Daddy this time with the flamethrower was as brutal, but to my defense, I usually do arrow toes. Nonetheless, while her dad didn't deserve to die, there was at least a reason for it. Even though, of course, none of us would ever want to see that in our own loss, and it's a hard thing to ask of anyone. Meanwhile, Ellie had to watch it happen in a gruesome, traumatic way, calling out to him.
Joel, get up. Joel, fucking get up. Please stop.
Hearing him die, and not to any end, it was merely senseless, only for Abby to try to feel better. And Joel saved a life in killing Abby's dad, and Abby merely only tried to save her own. Now this is where we reach with Ellie here at the end. As we watch her reach Abby and save her as Ellie, many might think it was deserved after she spared Ellie twice, and that would be fair. But my broken down Ellie, the one I felt so close to in that moment, exhausted, wondering why she made her decisions, but knowing she needed to finish it, trying her best to do what she thought was right in her own way, trying to make sense of the world as we all do. It was in that moment that I realized that my keeping tally of Ellie and Abby's motives and their morals was never the point. That's not how you understand people. It's not how you love them, and that's not how you put yourself in their shoes. The only way to do that is to feel what they feel, honestly, and by losing your own projections, to exist as a whole in another's experience. And while playing someone's story in a game like this is about as close as we can get to really relating to another human on that deeper level, unless and until we can build that sort of empathy in our own lives, I truly believe gaming is powerful enough to change lives in ways like this if we let it. And so in their final fight, I didn't want Ellie to win for the first time, nor did I want Abby to. I just wanted them to stop. I wanted them to see each other as I saw them. And every time I'd fought before, of course wanting Ellie to win, I've even seen gamers suggest we should get to choose, which I think goes against everything these games build up. But even more than that, it would miss the point. Ellie finally, truly sees Abby in the same way she saw Joel. As she's drowning Abby and she sees Joel's face flash before her, she doesn't picture him dying. She pictures him living. She sees her last moments with him. And as I see him in that moment, I also see Joel at the museum, teaching us guitar, taking us through the music store in Billstown, and telling us about the ice cream trucks. Ellie pictures her last moments of Joel and remembers trying to start forgiving him. Whatever she realizes in that moment is a bit of a mystery to us as the player. But I imagine it's her realizing this isn't what Joel would want for her, nor is it what she wants for herself. It's not just that revenge isn't the solution. It's that she's found the path of letting go of anger before, and she'd gone far past where she should have let it go again. If she'd let go of her anger sooner, she might have even had more time with Joel. Anger and acting on it didn't serve her. All we can ever do is our best with what we have in this moment. And in that moment, killing Abby was not what was best. And because of both Ellie and Tommy's decisions in revenge, she somehow ended up saving Abby. A beautiful irony that completes both of their arcs simultaneously. I was silent for most of the half hour we spent in Santa Barbara, too emotional to speak. And when I finally do after their fight ends, you can hear my voice quivering. I could have let it out at that point. I'd been holding in tears for a bit too long, but it wasn't the racking sobs I even thought it would be. There's a stinging as my numbness clears, and when we get to that last scene of Ellie and Joel, the numbness is all gone and I've let go of everything else. Joel has become a home and a love for me over these hours and years of playing him. And the heavy emotion of the human experience brings a catharsis I didn't know was possible. I'm not even entirely sure in that moment what I feel. I just know that I want to do better. I want to learn from these characters and carry them with me as I hopefully make better decisions myself, as I go through any losses and pains. I want to take their lessons with me and live the life they wish they could go back and not throw away.
I'll see you around.
Yep.
There are a million ways we should have died before today.
and a million ways we can die before tomorrow. But we fight for every second we get to spend with each other. Whether it's 2 minutes or 2 days, we don't give that up.
If you've made it this far, a like and subscribe would help my channel so much. And if you want to see the entire live stream of this playthrough I just described, it is here on YouTube and I'll put it in the description below. I've started live streaming all of my major playthroughs on here, and I do all sorts of gaming videos like this. I'm mad curious, and I would love to see you in the next one. Okay.